Hey, I thought I would talk about some of the elements of walking bass. Um, this would be specifically over jazz progressions rather than, say, blues progressions. And, you see a lot of videos out there that have these clickbaity titles like, learn such and such with this one simple trick. Well, there are no simple tricks to complicated things, especially playing jazz. It's there's a lot of things to learn, and there are simple elements to it. There are simple things you can do to get through a song, but that doesn't mean that you're improvising a walking line. There's no simple trick to that. The only trick to that is hours and hours of practice and hours of thinking about chord structures. And that's how you learn how to improvise over things. Of course, if you're in a jam and you need to learn a jazz song, let's say for whatever, and this is past situations I've been where, I remember doing lots of Christmas shows, and they'd say, oh, it's that jazz style, and we're going to learn all these Christmas songs. Well, I could fake my way through it by using some simple elements like roots and fifths and using chromatics and doing some really simple things like that, and I could get through the gig. But I certainly was no jazz bass player. Um, and you can use those things too: roots, fifths, simple chromatics. In fact, when we talk about walking bass lines, they're really made of three things. They're made of scales, they're made of arpeggios, and they're made of chromatic notes. Those are the three elements to a walking bass line. There's really nothing else to know. But as you explore each of those subjects, they're pretty deep. It's a deep water. Um, what I would suggest is if you want to learn how to do this, you need to pick a vehicle to learn this, and which that means is you need to have a song. And I would suggest you start with a song, an old standard called Autumn Leaves. And there's a lot of information out there. A lot of books use that song as an example. And I think it's because it contains a lot of the elements that are in a lot of other songs. It has a style, an AABA form that's popular. It moves a lot in fourths, which a lot of jazz songs do. So there's a lot of things that you can learn from studying that song. And the first thing I think you need to learn is you need to learn the chords and the arpeggios that go along with that song. So I like to learn them, like I like to learn the chords like that up high in the bass. And then I like to learn the arpeggios. Or so you learn all the arpeggios of those chords, which are just playing the notes singly in the chords. It's nice, like when you're working on arpeggios. So like you've got F7, and learning it. I'm just right. So you know it over maybe a few octaves. Some of the different arpeggios, but you learn all of those things, and and then you also think about the chords, and you think about the scales that go with those chords. So the first chord's C minor seventh, and you could play a minor scale. You could play a Dorian scale. Um, and you go through the chords and you kind of think of, okay, what scales can I use with these chords? And that's just good knowledge to have, to know the scales that go along with the chords that you see. Um, Another thing that you can learn after you learn all of that stuff, and you kind of have so what you're basically doing is you're getting the form and the sound of the song and the sound of the chords in your head. That's really important. You should be able to memorize the song. You get to the point where you don't need to look at the sheet music. You can play the song all the way through. Maybe you're just playing roots and fifths or whatever. You're playing simple lines, but you can play the song all the way through. The next thing I would suggest is you learn these three things. They're called cycle exercises, and they're three patterns. And of course, if you think about three patterns, if we're going to use three patterns over three chords, well, there's 9 combinations there that we could use these patterns in. So you could take these three patterns, which I'm going to show you, and you can get a lot of mileage out of these. And this is another way to start. So the first pattern is a scale pattern. We're going to use Autumn Leaves. We're going to use the first 2 chords, which is C minor 7 and F7, right? Those are the 2 chords. And so the first pattern is a scale approach. So we're going, that's our root note. This note we're starting with, the C, and there's our F, our target note. We can do a scale. That's pattern 1. You can do it at any key. The next pattern is it uses the root so we're starting on C. We take C, the root. We use the minor third, and then we go up to the 5th of the chord, and then we walk down to our target, F. So here's our 2 patterns. There's 2 ways to get to F. There's a third way. Skip a whole step and then half step it up to F. So now we have 3 patterns that we can use, and this works. These patterns work when you're moving up a 4th or down a 5th. And what you can do is you can come up with all the different variations. Like we could play if we wanted to add a 3rd chord. So let's say we're going to do the first 3 chords. So we would do C minor 7th, F7, and B flat major 7th. And what we would do is we would first use the pattern number 1, the scale approach. All right, so that's using that first pattern for all of the changes. The second way, we use that first pattern and then the second pattern. The third way is we could use the first pattern and the third pattern. So there are right there 3 different ways that we can go from F to 7. Now we can start with the second pattern, and now we could go with the scale pattern. Now we can go with the second pattern again and go with the second pattern twice. Now we can go with the second pattern and go with the third pattern. We can start with the third pattern. And go with the first pattern. Start with the third pattern, go with the second pattern. Start with the third pattern and go with the third pattern again. So you see right there, using those 3 patterns, we came up with 9 different ways to go between between C, F, and B flat. So you need to practice those things. So those are called cycle exercises, and that's a way that you can start making your lines more interesting without really knowing a whole lot. You only need to know 3 things to learn those things. So those are ways to apply the chromatic and the scalar approach to walking. As you start getting more advanced, you can start thinking about changing your target notes that you're walking to. So you don't necessarily have to walk to the root of every chord each time. You could walk to a different note. So we could use an arpeggiated approach, like so we're going to start on our C again, C minor 7. And now we're going to play the F chord. But we didn't start on F. So I targeted the major third of that F augmented the F7th chord. So we can change our target note. We can use these things called enclosures. Those are really good if you're playing part of a line. You're like, okay, I don't know how am I going to get to this next note because it's not in the scale, right? So or a situation where you've got to walk between, let's say, C and D. Well, a walk typically has 4 notes in it, and there's only, you don't have enough notes you got to play to make that work. But what you can do is you can play, an enclosure is playing the note a half step above or below your target note. So if I got to walk between C and D, I could go. I could do any of those sorts of things, but as long as I just take a note that's a half step above or below the target note I'm going, it'll work, right? It's a way to get yourself out of trouble. And the other thing you can learn about are things called drops. Right? That's a drop. Those are drops. If you ever study Ray Brown's bass method, he's got a whole section on drops. But that's basically a way to rhythmically make things more interesting by dropping to a lower note. So those are the concepts, some of the basic concepts of building walking bass lines. And really, it gets a lot more complicated than what I just said, because when you start studying chromatic lines, you start learning chromatic lines that other players have done. You'll see like how complicated those things can get, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But there's a lot of people that are really awesome. I mentioned Ray Brown. If you listen to some of his work with Oscar Peterson, is phenomenal stuff. You could learn just by copying some of those lines. You could learn a lot of different things. So I hope that was informative. Thanks.